next speaker, Raju sir, Mr. Raju Sutar. Bringing his love and learning to the canvas, Raju says painting is about developing a dialogue with the canvas. In his own words, as I start to paint, a few imaginary lines appear on the canvas. As I bring one to life, others seem to appear. One stroke leads to another. There is no need for a predetermined concept or research. It is simply you and your space. The process of painting is a very intimate experience and journey. Having studied both European and Indian art, especially classical and tribal, Raju sir brings an Indian perspective into his work. Over the years, he has simplified his expression, removing unwanted lines in unwanted spaces and enjoying the journey as one situation transforms into another. We at Arisa have had the pleasure of working with Raju sir as a collaborator on our India Foundation for Arts project, and we really learned a lot from him, so I'm very excited to invite him for the Unconference today to talk about Prabhakar, Barwe and Klee exploring their artistic dialogue. So welcome Raju sir, thank you so much for being here.
Okay, like she said, now you know me, who I am. This is a project which I am going to talk about is a historic project which is happening here in Pune. We are going to have an exhibition of Klee and Barwe together. Never happened before in the history of world. So this project actually came to my mind way back when I was a student, and I used to go to Bombay and meet Prabhakar Barwe sir. And that was also a very interesting incident how I met with him. So I was actually attending as a volunteer one of my teachers' exhibition in Jahangir Art Gallery, and I saw Barwe sir coming in the gallery from a distance, and I approached him. And my teacher was busy with somebody in the dialogue, so I started showing him the works. And then I think he didn't like his work. Then we started having conversation, and then after a couple of paintings, he saw a few paintings, and then he suddenly turned around and said, "Cha gaisa hai?" So you want to have tea? So I said yes. And then we went to there was a nice restaurant they used to have called Samovar in Jahangir Art Gallery. So then the dialogue started, and as and how I started talking with him, and he actually published a book of his writings, which is based on his observation on art, Kura Canvas, and then we started talking about it. And then finally, what I realized is every time whenever I used to meet him, I used to feel like Klee and Barwe should meet, which was not possible because they are from two different continents and two different timelines. Like Barwe was born in 1936 and Klee died in 1940. So it was actually not possible, but there were so many layers overlapping in their dialogues, and both the artists were very articulate in their processes, and they were both observing what is happening with the forms, lines, and the basics of art. So I always used to think, and then when I used to come back to Pune, I used to go to Max Muller Bhavan. They used to have a great library, and where all the Klee books used to be there. So ever since that, I had this idea of, getting these two artists together. And last year, I just coined this idea to Goethe Institute, and they liked this idea. And then we have started this project with Zapurza. We are hosting because we have a collection of Barwe, like 28 paintings of his, and Klee Center from Switzerland. Klee was from Bern. He was a German-Swiss artist. So the Klee Center is involved in this, and of course Goethe Institute, who has initiated this project. So we started with a bit of translations. By Barwe's translation we did in German, and the Klee's translations we have done in Marathi. So that was the first part of the project. There are a series of podcasts and webinars, workshops happening all throughout a couple of years. And on September 26th, we are going to have an exhibition where some originals and some facsimiles of Klee are coming to India, and they will be displayed alongside. I have a co-curator, a German co-curator who is handling the European side. She is Mira Hertz. So this is a very interesting project which I am going to talk about. So basically, both the artists were engaged in observing things. What happens when you paint? What happens when you draw? So I'll just run through some images, and I would like to have some questions if you have. So this is a bit biography about Barwe, born in 1936. He was a graduate from JJ School of Art, Mumbai, and he was actually influenced by Paul Klee's work. Like most of that era, most of the artists were influenced by his work, as it was introduced by one of our great teacher, Shankar Parshikar. So Paul Klee's dialogue was very much discussed, and I always thought, when I was having my colleagues, students, they were all coming from different villages. They were not very familiar with English. So I always thought that Paul Klee, if his writing is available in Marathi, it would be a really great thing. So that thing inspired me to translate Paul Klee in Marathi. This is a painting by Barwe, which is when he was working at Weavers Center. There's a Weavers Center started by Pupul Jaikar, which was the idea to bring art and crafts together and bring some more light to it. So the Weavers Center is a fantastic institute where so many artists were involved. So Barwe started working with the textile craftsman and his idea of pictorial conditioning, and they started developing some images. This is one of the works from that era. This is when he was in Varanasi. The Weaver Center is also in Varanasi and Mumbai. So he came across a lot of tantric rituals, which they have a great symbolism and a very mystic quality to it. But what happened with Barwe is he was not interested in tantra as such, but he was interested in the visual vocabulary. What were they using, like the basic forms like circle, triangle, rectangle, lines, dots. These are the basic building points where he was working on. So this is one of the paintings from that era. This is how he has developed himself. He has created his own idea of space, where he used a lot of interesting scales, the difference of scales, difference of space. You don't find this vanishing point lines of perspective, but you find the space which is very deep and created in a suspended kind of a space. So this is coming later in his work. He also experimented with materials. Even in the early works, he used those foils from the cigarette packets and all. But here he has used some industrial paints, which in that period the artists were not using it. This is again quite a big work done in silk, Dupian silk. This is all our collection at Zapurda. So the idea of abstraction, he was contemplating on the idea of abstraction very much, but he was not keen on having his work as a pure abstraction. He always worked with figure and abstraction and in between also. Here, these are the few works where you can see the influence of Paul Klee. We are going to see Paul Klee's images also. This is again from the Weavers Center. The geometry and the patterns used in this. Barwe has extensively worked on paper and the lines, the subtlety of it, which you can directly resemble with Paul Klee's work, where mostly Paul Klee's work is on paper. I have been to Paul Klee Center in October, where I had a chance to see most of his work. Around 4,000 works I've seen, and most of them were on paper. So the sensitivity of line, the superimposition of space and form is very much influenced from there, but it is not direct influence. It is, so that's exactly why we are calling this project as interventions and intersections. So some portions where they intersect and some portions where they are completely different from each other. But there is a certain dialogue which we are trying to encode. This is one of his works. So the surrealist idea of this, Barwe always used to have some incidents behind the painting. This must have been this must have happened in his home, where the bottle was dropped by the bird. It was very much possible. But I didn't had a chance to talk about this. This we bought it very late, so if he was around, I would have asked him what really happened, and he would have had. He was a fantastic storyteller. So these are the form and the abstract form, and he used to always give us the metaphor of clouds as abstraction, and we always used to talk about abstraction, and we also discussed that the abstraction as such is not technically possible. Even if you think, there is a form, we call it a thought form. So technically there is no abstraction as such, but uh, there are forms which are in between, which we can not, what do you call it, you cannot recognize those. So those can be, boldly categorized as abstraction. So here you can see this change of scale, what happens with this pin, which the change of scale has created a very interesting space, a kind of a surrealist space. And Barwe always he used to draw every day, and whatever the vegetables used to come to his place, the first thing they used to go to on his table for sketching, and he used to sketch those, and then they used to go to kitchen, and then he used to eat those. So he has inspired from nature, like Paul Klee also was very keen observer of nature. And I think the basic quality of both the artists was to observe things. Once when we were discussing about something, and then he asked me whether you have seen those wires intersecting in the sky, when you see the electric wires. So when they intersect, where they are intersecting, that point will glow. You can also observe this sometimes. So it actually glows. It doesn't, become dark. It actually glows. That optical illusion is created when it is crossed. So those kind of a keen observations he used to, and he used to write it down in his book, in a diary. Then it converted into a book. We can talk about this if you have any questions. We can talk about each and every artwork. So these are the simple things. He always thought everything is a subject. Everything he sees around him can become the subject of his work. And then he used to decode it into lines and forms.
Did he give interpretations of his work, or did he just let the people make their
Yeah,
own?
he was keen on stripping the information of the form of the object. So he always was interested in stripping the information, and the viewer should add some information to it, whatever the viewer sees in it. And that was his idea. This is a glass of water. That's what he called. So this form box was always there in his painting, since we are here in box. So he used to always open that box in various ways and used to draw that. And his idea was to get into the inner space. Box defines the space, which is outer space and inner space. Without the box, there is only space. So he was keen on having that inner and outer space idea.
Was there always an object that he's actually sketching? He had an object in mind when he was sketching, or looking at something when he was sketching?
No, he had sketched almost everything. So once I don't have the image, there was one form which was like a person who's like in a yoga. But I said, where is that image coming from? So he said there was a tile broken in his toilet which resembled that, so he copied it. So objects like this, lamps and everything. This is again from the Viewers Center. This is a few sculptures he also made. This is one of his sculptures, which is in wood. Now we move on to Paul Klee. Paul Klee, as we all know, is a very famous modernist from Europe. Born in 1879, he actually was initially keen on in music. His father was interested in making him a musician, composer, and he was trained as a musician. But his grandmother, maternal grandmother, thought that he's a better artist, and he used to always sketch. So later on, he decided to become an artist. So this is again all his inspiration is coming from nature. So he was also a very keen observer of nature, and he used to go out and do this nature things same like Barwe. So Barwe also used to collect a lot of leaves, the dry leaves and everything around him, and get those into the studio and draw them. He also got some inspiration from his travel. He traveled to this place in Africa. This is a very interesting work where he was forced. He was having a German passport, and during the First World War, he was forced to join army, and he joined Air Force, and he was asked to do those stencil letterings on the aeroplanes and everything. So all this imagery remained in his mind, and then later on he worked on these letters as form rather than letter as the communication. This is again a different work. He has worked on a different kind of a pointillism and repetitive patterns in his work. This one is called Drinking Companion, and this actually is a very important work where he has actually painted Hitler. This is drawing of Hitler, which in that era he never liked, and they were actually very keenly observed and watched. But he has titled it as a Drinking Companion, but this is a Hitler for him. You can guess it, I think.
The mustache.
Yeah. And the eyes. This is one of his styles where he derived it from some Arabic calligraphy. So both these artists were interested in stripping the information and looking at it purely as a form, and creating a new interpretation out of it. This is how he observed and kept note. His writing is extensively available. There are so many books where he has written everything, and he later joined this Bauhaus movement, where the design school was again on the similar lines of Weaver Center, was having the new interpretation of art and design, and he actually taught in that art school, and then he used to create his classes because there were not a certain curriculum where they had to follow, but he observed everything and he tried to pass that knowledge to the students. So these are the few things he observed keenly about the forms, about the textures, colors. He also visited a studio of Delaunay, who was a great colorist, and then he came up with the color theories and what happens with the juxtaposition of a different color with different colors. So that he studied very keenly, and he has noted it down in diary. So this he has actually used the plant. this is again layered imagery he tried to use in his work, and some of this layered imagery is also can be seen in Barwe's work. So these are again few things which he was saying that this is a theory of pictorials, and he had come up with a lot of theories about what happens with light, line, the basic elements of art. Like he used to say, the line is a dot going on a walk. Yeah, so this is basically what I have to show you, so we can discuss it. So, thank you. I need some questions, please.
I'll open it up
Yeah.
to the audience for questions, thoughts, comments.
Have you ever seen Paul Klee before? Or Barwe? So what was your first impression about the artworks? Yeah.
I think one thing you see very often with artists is they have a tendency to eventually go towards more fluid
Yeah.
and abstract measures. Like even so, when I was learning art, let's say from my teacher and mentor, we learned forms and strict, let's say, realistic artwork and things more. And then we see how, regardless of how much knowledge you have of those things, you inherently, it almost feels like you have an inherent way wanting to move towards more abstract and fluid and interpretive ways of perceiving reality, which I think is something that you can't achieve through photography.
Yeah.
For example.
Very true. I think this is a very primitive kind of expression we have. All of us, we do in our initial ages. And this is very primitive, like the dance or the singing or painting is very primitive. Like dealing with lines, you must have seen very early paintings in caves. They also dealt with lines, and they tried to, convert the three-dimensional forms in those lines. So this is a very primitive kind of expression we have, and the realism is a very short-lived period where the craft was very important before the invention of photography. So once the photography is invented, then there was a big question: what should be done with the realism? And then actually that was a great turning point in art, where everybody started thinking about what really art meant for them. So that's exactly what the difference between going towards the fluidity and simplicity. It's basically going back to your instincts. Yeah. Yeah.
I have a question
Yeah.
actually about the process. So
Yeah.
you said both of them talked a lot about their process
Yeah.
as an artist. So what are the common, like, are there any emotional processes that they talk about that they say, okay, it's helping me express myself or deal with a situation? I think Paul Klee was also doing a lot of political, social,
Yes.
Hitler
Yeah.
painting
Yeah.
or a sketch that you showed us. So did they ever talk about the meaning-making process of like how they made meaning of their emotions through their art, or was it always it's open to interpretation?
I think painting is always open for interpretation, but these guys, they always try to strip the information and make it more open. For even if you see a lamp, but it can be much more than that, like texture or maybe the line. It can be more than that. So they obviously, as a citizen, they were also politically oriented, both of them. But I think that comes as a package. Sometimes it is obvious, and sometimes it is and it's like undercurrent. So it is obviously there. But what I think is what happens with Barwe and Paul Klee is both of them were introvert, and they kept observing things in very smaller details, and they tried to derive some meaning behind the thing, the multi-layered meaning they try to find for themselves. They were not imposing their ideas on anybody else. Yeah.
Just as a comment, I think that comes up in both the artists for me.
Yeah.
That while they may be abstract, they're both intentional.
Yeah.
Like Klee said before.
Yeah.
So as an observer, I up on what the intention is, but it's clear that it's done. They knew that they were paying. They set up and they knew that they were going to paint, and then they have executed that action. So now something that is like just more spontaneous, or just like I guess as a shift of mind, I'm just going to paint now. Now it's something that was more.
No, I think there is the thing in that, but there is a structure, the decided structure, but within that they were very fluid. That I can show you one. In this form on a left, I don't think that was designed like pre-designed or predetermined. It comes with the flow. So within the structure they were abstract. So you have to see, you have to break it down in smaller pieces and see. So they were very spontaneous, both the artists, but there was a structure in it. So within the structure you'll have to break it down to see the abstraction of it, see the spontaneity of it.
As a naive observer of paintings, I have never been trained in, let's say, painting or sketching or fine arts in general. My background is dance, right? But now as a researcher, we look at paintings and we try to understand here what's happening in the brain, etc. As a naive viewer, how do I understand like what the artist is trying to convey? One, and like what are the features? Because you talked about texture. The minute you said texture, I could relate. Oh yeah, that's true. There's so much texture and depth to the painting. But if you maybe hadn't said that word, and if I didn't have previous experience with paintings, how would I be able to tap into those like features? Can you?
Yeah, the only problem is that we kind of analyze the whole thing. So that analysis is the hurdle. So if you try to experience thing, and there is a process where they call it close looking, where you have to sit down and you have to strip all the information, who is the artist, what is the medium, everything, and you have to keep watching it and then keep observing it. At one point your analytic mind stops and then you start experiencing it. So there is another process which is called slow looking, where you have to look at the painting for hours and then you slowly start getting connected to it. So the analytic mind is a problem, and that needs to stop somehow, and that we have now somehow trained ourselves to derive meaning from everything. What will happen if I do this? What will happen? You keep on thinking on those lines, and that is what the problem in any kind of art, even in the dance. If you stop that analysis, otherwise you keep looking at the technique, how good that mudra is, or instead of that, what energy is coming through is I think that is important, and that I think one has to train yourself. It cannot be coming suddenly, because it's like if somebody here started speaking Chinese, what will happen? So it's similar. So we have to train yourself to go into that. So that I think is necessary in any type of art. But the entertainment art is something which is easy because it makes you passive, and that is something you like better. The moment you have questions in your mind, you start rejecting it, and that happens with any good art.
So what makes a painting famous, for instance? Art is something very personal, right?
Yeah.
Even for the artist to have painted something like this was something very personal to him.
Yeah.
And people like us watching it, each of us has our own perceptions of what we see or interpret or try and understand. So given that there are so many people viewing that same piece, what really makes something kind of stand out, and what makes it famous and a collector's item really, So what goes into that process?
So there are two things. There is art and there is market of art. So the all famous things and everything is happening because of the market of art. So Van Gogh was not known before his letters were revealed, and then through the letters he got famous, not because of his art, and then people started thinking that this is a great art. So it's not the art which is making it popular or collectible item. It's the rarity, because market needs rarity, market needs uniqueness. So sometimes it is originally inherent in the painting, or sometimes it is created by the market. So there is a completely distinct difference between the actual making of art and actual the art becoming famous in itself. For an artist like me, I put down my brush down, and that's it. The purpose of painting is done.
I was also wondering, now that you discussed, let's say, the market of
Yeah.
art,
Yeah.
this is something that I think a lot of artists struggle with themselves, where once you start creating and there's a market, there is at least at some degree some influence that the market has on your art. So I think this not just goes for, let's say, like painting, but also, let's say, music.
Yeah.
A lot of musical artists create what sells. So, but that in the end sort of comes at the cost of your own satisfaction with your work. How should an artist, let's say, deal with that dissonance?
So if you look at the market, this I always tell, like this is like a farmer's. When the onion is 100 rupees, everybody wants to sow onions, but it becomes 10 paisa, because the market is based on a very simple logic: demand and supply. So if there is a huge supply, the market will not buy your work. But what sells is originality, and you all of us are original. Every single person is different from each other. So you have to reach that point where you know yourself, and that exactly what market needs.
Not like a, I don't wanna ask a question, but like a general comment.
Yeah.
Like the session started with a dialogue.
Yeah.
So what the common thing that I found was the line work that
Yes.
both of them did was very similar.
Yeah.
There's a point where I could not distinguish between two painters.
Yes, the treatment of line.
Yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
that was very similar, even though it's abstract. And I don't know anything about art, have no background. But I'm very naive with art, so like I think abstract means that there shouldn't be any particular lines going on, But in certain paintings I did found, like in this one also, there's very intentional line work that they have done. So that was a very new thing for me.
Yeah. So these are basic building blocks of art, dot, line, color, texture, form, and space. So every artist is dealing with these elements only, and a little bit of variation, little bit of observation of that artist makes it totally different. Very little change makes it totally different. And then this permutation and combination is not finished yet. It is still infinitely open. Yeah.
So this is we go on time.
Yeah, we could have done.
So my question is more in terms of, I would like you to tell me how to view art. So I don't have any understanding of art or background on viewing art. So when you spoke about them trying to strip off information from the painting, it really reminded me of how authors believe in the death of an author, and they don't want their name to be associated as the context for the literary piece. But at some point, I think beyond one point, we tend to associate the political context, social context in which the art was created. But I'm not sure how to interpret a painting or understand a painting in a context like that, like either a social context or a political context, if the picture itself is not giving me any cues per se. Because I've seen people look at painting and come up with such beautiful understanding
Stories
of it, and sometimes I wonder, what am I missing in the painting? Why am I not seeing this? So like, how do I engage in a painting in a way that I am also able to make meaning out of it?
Yeah, just like I said, art is experiential. So you have to try and experience things. Where every artist is exactly all the modernists and the movement after that, they were very much interested in the experience of it, because that is what the real art is. So experiencing it is very important. So, but sometimes the context will make you enjoy it much better. Sometimes, but not always. But these are like layers. If you go deeper and deeper, there is first thing is the artist, where is he from, which cultural background he is from, what conditioning he is having, and then the political conditioning and the other things also. No, these layers are enhancing your experiences. So if they are there with you, they will enhance your experience. But I think the first thing is the connection, which the artwork needs to establish with you. So if that is not making any establishment, so you have to move on. You have to don't keep dealing with that again and again, because it's a forced idea to create a dialogue. If somebody is not willing to talk to you, how will you create that dialogue? It's the same thing about the painting. You know, you have to just move on to another work, and if that work talks to you, you can engage it in a better way. Yeah.
We had an interesting talk today on art, where they said when you look at a painting, see what is the emotion that it triggers in you. You know, which made sense to me, because I also don't understand
Yeah.
abstract art. But when she said, what is the emotion that it triggers, and what is the memory that it triggers, that particular emotion, what is the memory, past memory that it triggers? You know, which made sense. But then, in doing that, sometimes I felt that I missed out on the actual painting, you know. So, I don't know, is that how you actually...
No, this is what I mean by the experience of it. But it's like, you know, it's a mirror of your mind always. So the painting, that's exactly why the painting needs to be on the wall for years, and you have to keep coming back like a good book. You keep reading it and you find another meaning to it. So painting is always like that. So if you are in a good mood, you'll try to find good things from the painting. If you are not in a good mood, you'll find those dark things. Or that is the reflection of your mind, which you are reflecting on the painting. So it's not the painting, it's just an opportunity to reflect on yourself.
Somebody brought up realism
Yeah.
earlier. So the thing is, back in school, I used to draw as well, but the education system was as such that it made me start off with very concrete ideas of what you're supposed to draw, like shapes and lines and forms. And it's very hard for me now to divulge in abstract art per se, because I've sort of conditioned myself to draw a certain way, and if somebody gives me a topic or a theme, I think of very normal things, expected stuff. How does one go into the field of abstract art after being conditioned to think of art in a certain way?
So you have to differentiate training and art. You know, like you learn grammar, but how will you learn poetry? It is very similar to that. The grammar is a technique. The training, you have to get the training, of course. It's like when you learn the bicycle, you learn the balance, and you're totally focused on the balance. But once you achieve that balance, you like sit on it and you sing and you do much things on it. So that's how the training needs to be gone. As soon as you have it, the training needs to go, because if you keep going back to the training, it will only show you how trained you are. It will not show your expression as such. So that thing needs to be overcome. Yeah.
So all these paintings are great work, but besides using paper canvas, were these great people or great artists also interested in utilizing maybe material that is visible in 3D dimensions, or maybe molded into different forms, as you said?
Yeah. There are so many artists. Almost every artist has tried everything, and that actually gives you the idea of your expanse, your limitations, and your ability to deal with the form, space, and every artist does that. So that is a very essential thing. If an artist is having an inquiry, so he will definitely deal with a lot of materials which are very temporary, also sometimes very fluid, very concrete, all sorts of things. Any good artist will try and do that, and they have done it. Sometimes they will not exhibit it, but almost everyone has done it. Yeah. Are we good? Thank you.
You have a question?
Yeah.
We can do one more.
Okay, so during COVID, I had started painting, and I started painting a portrait of a woman, and it took me like almost 2 months to complete it. So in the beginning, it was like sad emotions of mine which was painting, in that painting, and later on as COVID, it took a huge toll and everything. So in the end, I was having some happy feelings also. And when the whole picture got completed, so I used to show it to people who used to come to visit me and all. So I believe that there was like a section that happened unknowingly, and one part of her face was sad, and it was showing a different kind of emotion, and the other part was showing something, you're being strong, and in a way, in a total different view. So when people used to come over and I used to ask, what is your interpretation about it? So I used to get very different answers to it. So I feel like, as you said, like, people have their own interpretation, they analyze things. So with that painting, I had a whole different experience about that.
Yeah. So it's basically how you are conditioned. The whole idea of emotions is also very much conditioned, very much imposed on you. Like, do we really know how hungry we are? There's the real hunger. Have you experienced it? But it's like last moment. If I don't get food, I'll die. Have you experienced that? You eat because 2 o'clock I have to eat. That kind of thing is happening with the ideas we are carrying with us. So those needs to be very experiential also, the ideas. And again, the stripping of information also needs to be done in those ideas also, not just in the paintings and the forms. Yeah. Thank you.